Welcome to another edition of Pinot with Pag and Panettieri, brought to you by the folks at N-able. We discuss the critical role that MSPs play in the small business ecosystem and where your business could be heading next to succeed. Got a question for us? Post it in the comments area and we'll try to cover it in a future edition. John, great to see you. How you been?
Hey, good, Joe. Nice to see you. Things are great here in Boston. Nice to see you again.
Yeah, I appreciate you carving out some time. So, listen, there's probably a million things I want to ask about, but I'll just give you a broad what's new. What like number one thing on your mind, what you've been up to?
Geez, it's a long list. We've been quite busy, as you know. But you know, actually, what's top of mind is something we just got done with yesterday. We actually just finished our first tabletop exercise as N-able, and so we got that done, and that was an all-day affair. So we just crossed that interesting milestone off our agenda.
Okay, so listen, I've heard the term tabletop, but I've heard it applied to all different industries. Like there's tabletop exercises for financial risk and financial services. There's tabletop exercises in cyber. There's exercise everywhere. What did your tabletop involve? What was going on?
Yeah, sure. Good question. Sometimes people use the term tabletop or TTX, and other folks use the term Wargaming. But basically, what we did yesterday with the help of some outside cyber experts and advisors is we brought the leadership of N-able through an exercise, a cyber exercise where we said, hey, a certain set of facts happen. How are we going to respond? And it was great. And, you know, it's interesting. We're in some ways a new company. As you know, we went public 2 months ago, and we have some new leadership. And to bring that new leadership team as a first time as a new entity to walk through the exercise and say, hey, what do you do was great. To kind of quote the famous philosopher Mike Tyson, who said, everybody has a plan until you get punched in the mouth. Well, a tabletop exercise is really kind of that punch in the mouth. Okay, this is happening. Now you as a leadership team need to respond and work your way through it. So it's a great practice, one in which I'm happy that we did. And honestly, Joe, it's something that I talk to MSPs about as well, because for the MSPs, they need a plan. They themselves need an incident response plan. Their small, medium enterprise, or their mid-market enterprise, or their publicly traded companies that they might be supporting, they need a plan. And that's good, but that's not enough. You really need to drill and walk through the plan. It's just like sports, Joe, right? You have a game plan or a strategy, you have plays, but what do? You run the plays, you run the drills, you see what worked, what didn't work, you see where you're weak and where you're not weak. And then you run them again, and you run them again, and you run them again in an attempt to improve and get better. And that's really what the exercise is. So when I talk to even some of our mid-size and even our larger MSPs, we talk about preparedness, and it goes beyond just a plan or just a checklist. It's running the drill, running the tabletop exercise. And it's not about winning, as they reminded me yesterday. I've got my competitive nature, but it's about understanding where you are and improving, assessing the risks, and then continuing to improve there. So it's a great exercise. And I think it's an exercise that companies of all sizes can do and should do.
Okay, thanks for the background. So a few questions on a tabletop exercise, and I'll compare it to U.S. football. I know we have some international viewers, but I'm going to use U.S. football as the example. You talked about a team running plays, and you got to practice those plays and move down the field and really understand what you're doing. On the other hand, in U.S. football, the defense is going to keep changing their strategy in terms of how they're going to blitz you and hit you. And in fact, the defense in many ways is, in the cyber world, it's the attackers, it's the offense that are coming at you different ways. In these tabletop exercises, are you just practicing best practices to minimize risk, or are you actually like running through scenarios of different ways you're going to get hit and then what your response is?
No, and you know what, that's a great analogy. And unfortunately, the defense, and in this case, that would be the bad guys. You're right. They're changing their defensive schemes and the way that they're going to attack kind of that quarterback. It's actually a great analogy because at the end of the day, they're trying to go after the jewels of the company. And a lot of time that's data and information and our systems. And you're right, Joe, they're constantly trying to evolve and come up with new schemes. So what we found through our advisors and our experts is to actually run the play and our advisors actually are the defense in this case, and they'll do research on us, and they've done research on us, and they will introduce things into our environment and into us, and we'll need to respond. So they have us run certain scenarios in the plays, and it's interesting, and this should not be that surprising to where we are in 2021 and where we are as an industry. Those plays involve parts where they're exposing MSPs or where the end customers are. And in scenarios that we run and others run, and really the one that we ran yesterday, it's okay, an MSP detects something in their environment. An MSP's end customer may detect something in their environment. What are the clues that you see? How do you walk that through? How do you begin to assess, troubleshoot, communicate? Because the reality, Joe, is with a lot of the focus on supply chain attacks, and we know because we've been around the industry and around some of these bigger events, supply chain is a pretty strategic view for where the bad guys can get out because of the asymmetrical influence we in the MSP community have. The vendors have an asymmetrical influence, and you, the MSP, has an asymmetrical influence. And so to make sure that we understand all parts of that ecosystem and how all that plays in is key, and also how that plays in and how we're working together. So yeah, it very much starts with a scenario and a play that's likely. And unfortunately, in the world we're living in, where an MSP can be a target, their end customer may be a target, and the supply chain is definitely a target. It was an effective exercise for us for sure.
Got it. And then tell me a little bit about, without revealing any company secrets, obviously, but sort of the thought process on chain of command, because time is of the essence when one of these things comes down. It can be the difference between one MSP getting hit and 20 or 50 or hundreds getting hit as the dominoes fall, unfortunately, in supply chain attacks. Are you giving any special or new thought to sort of chain of command, both within your company, but also across the MSP ecosystem? But also you have new managers on board, and it's almost like having new people on that football roster and making sure everyone's in the same spot and communicating from the same playbook, but also getting the plays in. I'm rambling a little bit, but I think you get the question.
No, it's a great point. So, that's what's key about having a plan. And it's important that you actually have a physical plan that you can touch, that's documented. And this is true for the MSPs. I suggest the MSPs, when they talk to their customers, that they're pushing for that, so that you know the who's, what's, when's, where's, and why. It's important to know who you're involving in the communication. It's important to know at what level certain markers need to do so that you introduce the right folks, because it has different impact, right? So it becomes critical. Look, we know we're all human, right? And so people want to be brought in, but when you bring in too many folks, it starts to slow down decision making and chain of command. So it's important in the process that you know who to bring in, when to bring in, the roles of everybody. It's also important to make sure that you know what advisors to be bringing in, right? MSPs shouldn't think that they're at this alone, right? And there's plenty of advisors that they should be looking at. They can leverage us here at N-able and our CISO, Dave McKinnon, our security nerds to give some guidance, but they can also look at their existing advisors, whether it be outside counsel, even your insurance agencies that provide cyber insurance. There's a bunch of different folks out there that are at your disposal. What I encourage MSPs to do is to know what role an advisor will have if something were to happen. What lawyer does my lawyer have expertise in that? Is my insurance covered? Does my insurance ask me to go through a certain route? Do I have a third party that I can help with the forensics? These are the things that we never want to have to use, but we need to know that we have those muscles built in place in that case. And so for us, in this world, there's effectively, there's two types of threat actors, right? We see the ransomware type of stuff where a lot of times it's kind of described as a smash and grab, where they're trying to encrypt your data for that ransom. And then there's more of those persistent threats. And with the supply chain, we know that both are out there, that both are kind of looming and lurking in the community. And we need to understand what that means, because they'll have a little bit of a different response. And if it's a persistent threat, they might be affiliated with a nation state, and what you need to do, and what type of authorities you need to kind of pull in to help you. So, it's just like everything else, Joe. It's you need a plan, you need to work that plan, you need to be prepared. But it's also important to know that who's, what's, and where's, and who to bring in, both internally within your four walls, but who are the advisors that you can trust in time of crisis as well.
Yeah. So here's another naive question for you. But I think a lot of MSPs, especially the smaller ones, can probably relate to it. So I think the vast majority of our audience is very familiar with, business continuity planning and testing, right? And I almost chalk that up. I'm back to an NFL analogy. So here we go. I compare business continuity planning and maybe a quarterly test, or however you frequently going to test it. That's like running the offense with no defense. You're going down the checklist, and here's how we'll get our data back in the event of something terrible happening. I feel like this wargaming you're talking about, or tabletopping, is more like it's that same scenario, except that there's minefields all over the field as you're trying to navigate down the field to be cyber resilient and get this under control. It is the world of business continuity and this tabletop exercising in terms of cyber war games drastically different. I mean, is it? I'm just wondering how the smaller MSPs in particular can move down this field.
You know what, Joe? It's actually it's perfect. I think of them as hand in glove, right? And by the way, I think you have football on your mind because you have one of the best catches in NFL history behind you. I was a Cowboys fan growing. I'm a Patriots fan now in my Boston roots, but in the 70s and 80s, we didn't have much to cheer about in Boston about the Patriots. So I was a Cowboy fan, so that picture is a little bit bittersweet for me. But
I need to clarify something. So I was a Cowboy fanatic, and that catch broke my heart. The painting is not actually like literally Dwight Clarke catch. It just looks exactly like it. Listen, I'm an Italian guy from Long Island. It's a cheap painting. No, yeah, right. Yeah, it's me. But no, what happened was I was out to dinner with my sister in a cheap Italian restaurant. I was probably like 16, and I was captivated by this cheap painting on the wall. And here we are 35 years later, and it's still in my house. So it's like a representation of the catch, but it's not the catch. But yeah, it broke my heart as well. I was a Cowboy fan. But I'm sorry, I totally went off track. You were about to talk us through a little bit the smaller MSPs.
Continuity and so I think it's similar. Like we know we're all familiar with the NIST framework, and that last element of the NIST framework is that ability to recover, and a business continuity plan is a key part of that, right? But I'd argue that it's probably not just enough. At N-able, we have a world-class backup and disaster recovery platform. It's completely cloud-based. We actually give MSPs the ability to test their restore for that exact reason, Joe, because hey, we have the ability to restore, but if we need to, what does that look like? I want to make sure it's there. I want to prove to my customer that it's there. So we give them the ability to test that restore as part of their continuity plan. I would say it's not too dissimilar. I use hand in glove because I think it's one of the core parts of it, but these other parts are more around the process, what you do, and what can you do if we need to do it. Another good thing, we all know, unfortunately, that email is a surface area that the bad guys like to go after, whether it be a phishing attempt or getting control or access to folks' email. And so if that's the case, what do you do? How do you communicate? Alternative methods of communication. If you're an MSP and you believe you may have been compromised, and you start throwing emails around your organization that says, hey, we've been hacked. Well, good. Now you just alerted the bad guys, and every move now that you're making, you're alerting the bad guys as to how you're going to respond. So what are the alternative methods, whether it be, a protocol like Signal or another protocol where you can communicate, or you set up a separate email system. These are all the things that you flush out when you do these type of war game exercises, because it exposes some of the spots. And so business continuity is a key part of that. Similar, you need to have that business continuity plan documented. It's a big part of both for the MSPs practice, but I also think for the small, medium enterprise practice. And this is really, I'd say, an evolution or a continuation of that same kind of idea.
Got it. Okay. So I'm on a roll with the NFL analogy, so I'll continue with it. Here's one more for you. So you do the war game, right? And that's sort of the game. It's the live game. Game is over now. do you watch quote unquote game film post game? Do you do a post mortem and then like sort of change up your strategy based on feedback and then do future war games as well? I mean, what's sort of the process post war game?
Yeah, 100%. So it's important, just like any other good business process, that you take a step back and do a little bit of a post-mortem on the things that you did well and the things you didn't do so well. And a lot of times in business, we tend to focus on the things that we didn't do well and improve on them, which is good. But it's also important to call out the things that you did well. Why? So you can replicate them. And so we'll do that. Actually, the advisors that we brought in are actually in that process now. We're actually surveying the folks in my leadership team and say, hey, what felt right? And it wasn't just our leadership team. We went all the way through different parts of the organization and said, hey, what worked for you? What didn't work for you? Where do you think we could improve upon? We're going to document that. We're going to study that. And then between now and our next exercise, the goal is to improve on some of those. And my guess on that next one, they'll change up the scenarios. They'll come at us from a different vector, because that's what the bad guys will do. They're not going to come at us the same way. And we'll need to react and make sure our comms plans and our incident response plans are there, and we'll continue to improve. Again, it's not really about being perfect or winning. It's about recognizing where you are and trying to build off that and improve. So yeah, we'll absolutely do that post-mortem, process that, pick out those things that we think that we can address immediately, certain things that we can address over the medium term, and do our best to improve on those. That's part of just the exercise, which makes it, I think, so fruitful, because you can immediately gain a better business posture as a result of it. It's one of those things that if you do the postmortem, you build it into your new practice, the next time you will do better. You will be better prepared.
Got it. Okay. So one more question involving more supply chain. So as you do this post-mortem, you spoke a little bit about this shared supply chain and the interaction of everyone, but I'll just paint the crystal clear picture in terms of my question. You've got N-able, right? And then you've got MSPs, and then you've got the end customers. And it's like suddenly the universe is pretty big out there. So as you do these war games in the post-mortem and you harden N-able, so to speak, do you think you're ultimately able to then harden the MSP ecosystem and then harden even the end customer ecosystem beyond that as well? And I know no security is perfect. I'm just wondering what your thought process is.
No, sure. Look, this has been a trend. I think it's been put in bold and emphasized during 2021 with some of the industry events that's been happening. But it's not really new. But what that trend is, as an MSP, they recognize that what security meant maybe even a couple of years ago, that the world has completely changed. They have a broader responsibility. And it's some of those spheres, right? For an MSP, they need to make sure that their own house is in order. They need to make sure that their employees are following the right protocols, that they have the right processes, that they're leveraging the right technology. So that's one bubble. They then need to also make sure that they're preaching the framework and the hygiene and the security for their end customers. And what's, I'd say, more of an emphasis these days, and we're seeing it in our customer conversations, it's super top of mind when I'm talking to small MSPs, medium and large MSPs, is they're turning upward at the vendors that they're looking at and trusting them with their information in the ecosystem and saying, hey, what are you doing? What are your standards? And what are you doing, whether it relates to multi-factor authentication, and how are you building your products, and what are you doing to make sure that you're in compliant, making sure that my data is protected, and depending on your geo, if you're GDPR compliant. So we're fielding more questions. MSPs are asking of us more and more and more, and I'm glad. It's an awakening. And by the way, they're aware of it, but their end customers are aware of it. They see the N-able, the end customer sees the N-able logo on their machine sometimes, right? And they're curious to see, and they're saying, hey, what is supply chain? So their MSPs are being asked these difficult questions by the end customers. And by the way, it's because of the awareness, but also MSPs are landing larger and larger accounts. Which is a tremendous opportunity. We can talk about that one for days, but the MSPs are going into larger and larger accounts, Joe. And with that door being opened comes a responsibility where they're expecting the MSPs to have a certain level of hygiene. That hygiene is almost completely predicated on which vendor they use. And for me, I think we're in a good spot. We're a publicly traded company. We got to talk about that. we're at scale. I'm both willing and able to, pun intended, to invest in security, whether it be people that are focused on security and our CISO and him bringing on people, our tech stack that we're building, and on the how. And so, for me, it's that ability, that willingness and ability to invest in security. So I'm seeing that more of a focus for MSPs, and I'm glad it should be. As part of the spin, Joe, we had this unique opportunity because a lot of businesses, my MSPs, they're probably facing some of this right now where they're saying, okay, I need to improve my security posture, but I just invested X number of dollars in this other protocol or this other tech stack. We had the unique opportunity as part of the spin to go build we built a brand new house in 2021. So we had
and let me just clarify. When you say spin, you and I talk all the time, so I'm familiar. You're talking about the spin out of N-able from SolarWinds, not the John spin on the industry. So just to clarify for everyone out there.
No. Yeah, thanks. So, So, and by the way, so the wine, hopefully you got the wine. So this is called Pinot With Pags, Joe. So it's not for those that we have Landmark, people always ask what the wine is so that you and I drink. They ping me after. So this is from Landmark Vineyards, which is in the West Coast. It's a Pinot Noir. We chose the term landmark because it's a landmark moment in our history. In July, we spun out from SolarWinds. And we became a separate publicly traded company. So when I say spin, we are now an independent company. And that, when I talked about that tabletop, it's the first time as N-able, as a separate standalone public company, that we were able to do that. And so, it was definitely a landmark moment. I forgot the original part of the.
No, and listen, I think the bigger point, tying landmark to one of the words you said, and by the way, yes, absolutely, salute. It's always good to see you. So in addition to landmark, there's a related word you said earlier, awakening. And I think, you're making the case, hey, it's a landmark year for us in terms of the spin out. But I think it is a landmark year in terms of security, bad and good. There's been some big hits, no doubt. The industry has taken some bruises, but I do think there's been an awakening, to your point, across the ecosystem, the end customer, the partner, and the MSP software providers. I'm not saying everyone was asleep at the switch, but I think everyone is just an awakening. I mean, that really is the word. Is that the way you see it?
Well, it's an awakening for the level of sophistication that defense that you and I talked about before, the bad guys are bringing to the table. I think historically we thought about ransomware a little bit more of that smash and grab, someone looking to kind of get in and make a buck. And while that's still true and still very much a prevalent problem in the industry, it's a little bit more of these persistent threat actors that are out there that we need to be mindful of. And that brings a different level of sophistication. There's more, unfortunately, Joe, there's more and more money that the bad guys have at their disposal. So they're upping their game, and they're willing to be patient, and they're willing to come at us from a bunch of different sources. So I think that awakening is more about that level that the defense has ratcheted up their game and some of the novel ways that they're approaching it, right? It's not just, hey, let me just do some brute force attack or gain access to your password, which those are still common, but it's now some of the supply chain variables that are playing in. So I think that's a lot of where the awakening is. And what that does is it makes my team and my CISO and our team think about all the different variables and what that surface area looks like. People also think, Joe, that moving to the cloud means you're more secure. It really just means the cheese has been moved, right? And you need to now
or broken apart, by the way. Now the cheese is in multiple places.
The cheese is in multiple places, data is in multiple places, that surface area is in multiple places, some of which are covered by your providers and our companies like us, but some of which it matters. So how are you accessing that information? How are you configuring that information? And so it's changed the game a little bit. And I think that's where a lot of that awakening is happening. And unfortunately, we still see that the small, medium enterprise are very much a targets, but that supply chain who has that golden access to the small, medium enterprise. And that's what we have, is that tremendous relationship with the MSP partners. We have a tremendous relationship with the small, medium enterprise. I often say, the N-able, we've cracked the code in servicing small medium enterprise solely because of our partnership with the MSPs. It allows us to help manage and protect hundreds of thousands of small medium enterprises across the globe, millions of users, millions of devices across the globe. And with that responsibility or with that privilege comes a bunch of responsibility, because they know if they gain access to a vendor like us, they have access to all of these millions of machines and data sources across the globe.
Yeah, and I want to build on that point a little bit in terms of this idea that I'll start with technology, but then I want to move on back to your tabletop thought. And the wonderful thing about today's technology is enterprise class technology is now available to the end customer through the MSP.
Right.
That being the case, you mentioned earlier in the program these war games and the tabletop scenarios. You also mentioned that you've got mid-market MSPs, larger MSPs that are serving publicly held companies, et cetera. But let's bring it down to the smaller MSPs as well. Do you see a scenario where more and more of the smaller MSPs are able to participate in these tabletop exercises eventually?
Yeah, I do. I mean, so, one of the things that we're kicking around internally is going beyond the checklist, right? We see, you follow whatever your favorite blog is. Of course, it'll be one of yours, but if not, others and even other folks in the industry talk about, here's a checklist, here's a checklist, here's a checklist, which is great that we're giving folks a checklist. It's an educational resource, but how do we put that in practice? And so, if we can put a framework together for these smaller MSPs that they can run some of these scenarios. There's also a bunch of third parties that help folks run scenarios and again, text and flex that muscle. But Joe, I think your points is spot on, that this is not a problem for the larger MSPs. It's a problem really for the entire community, and or a challenge, I should say. And this is actually also an opportunity, because an MSP can really step up and show their strategic significance to a mid-market enterprise, a small, medium enterprise. They're looking at you. They're looking at the MSP to help them navigate through all this, to help them navigate with their Microsoft instance or their SaaS applications, or with their backup and disaster recovery. They're also looking at you to help them with their incident response and their business continuity. So for me, it's an awesome opportunity for the MSPs that they can really continue on their path of being that strategic partner, right? The industry's grown up a lot, right? From the closet to the cloud, right? But the MSPs matured a lot, really, where they were being looked at really just helping with the network, being that helped us to really be a strategic partner. And a lot of that now has to do with the security hygiene and the health and the compliance of their companies that they're serving. So it's a tremendous opportunity. And I think it's one that I'm seeing MSPs by and large leaning into, which is a great sign.
Yeah, no, it's great to see the MSPs leaning in. Listen, I think all the MSPs are getting into the security pool, whether they're in the shallow end and maybe partnering up with MSSPs in the deep end, or partnering up with software companies such as N-able. I think everyone's getting in the pool, which is great to see. And John, I just wanted to thank you again for educating me about the tabletop war game scenario. Very interesting. I look forward to our next conversation.
No, thanks, Joe. And one more time, we'll do a salute and good luck and happiness and health to your family. Cheers.
Yeah. Same to you, John. Thank you.